We have seen the many challenges at the airport, such as the cost of development and accountability, and recently the security with the tragic death of a TSA agent. We all believe that we need a safe and secure modern airport that develops good and safe jobs and accessible, affordable health care, family health care for over 6,000 workers that work above and below the airplane. As we move forward together, what challenges do you see in holding the airline industry and the airport leadership accountable to ensure good and safe jobs?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the work not only you do every single day, and as I said earlier, I saw that with my own eyes. I know it every single day. I've seen it whenever I'm at the airport, but to see it, just so folks may not know this, the first call was made actually by a service worker, a kind of what's called below the wing, but they're actually above the wing, folks who help passengers get into the airplane. Somebody who, when this went down, made the first call, and I listened to that person. And then I watched the video later of that person staying on the side as other people were fleeing, staying there and helping them out, helping them get out. So the commitment that we have at the airport is not just those who wear a badge, it's everybody. And the economic engine that is the airport must be a part of protecting what little middle-class jobs we have left. Post-recession, the poverty rate in LA County is up. Post-recession, the gap between rich and poor is greater. And yet, ironically, our economy, low-wage jobs are actually disappearing at a quicker rate than higher-wage jobs are appearing. So how do we square those two things together? What that means is that those good jobs that are here are increasingly not being taken by people who live in the city of Los Angeles. And those jobs that are here that we must protect need to include a living wage, need to include good health care, need to include the benefits that I think everybody in this room believes that people who work hard and literally, as we've seen, put their lives on the line and make sure that that great airport works, deserve. So what have I done concretely? One, I asked all of the airlines, first mayor to do this, to come together, and I met with all of the airlines early on, I think it was about a month and a half ago, and said, I would love to work with you to make sure that sparkling terminal that you see at Tom Bradley, that new international terminal, is what your terminals look like domestically. But I need to make sure that we're going to have labor peace and that you're going to be having the right folks who are not union busting, who are not trying to kick people out who have families because you don't want to pay the health care. And all the things that we have talked about and worked on are going to be a part of the future at LAX. And I got calls from CEOs of those airlines and others who have already moved the needle at LAX and other airports as well, saying, we want to work with good contractors. We're not going to say who it is, but we've asked some folks that are either union or have good benefits to apply in other airports, and that's the sort of attitude we're going to take here in Los Angeles. Second, we've convened a group with you all and other labor unions, with Jackie Goldberg, who's now part of the Airport Commission and has been a great fighter for middle-class jobs, and airport officials, to put a plan together of how long-term we're going to put the infrastructure in for labor peace. So when things do boil up, how it isn't an us versus them anymore. My expectation of airport management is that they will manage that labor peace. Short of that, you know, those folks won't be in place.
Can we go to another question? And okay, over here. You can't hold the microphone.
Hi, from Westchester. And this is directed to the mayor and the councilman. Yes, we think you are, from what the paper said, Mike, and talking to you, you are starting to address the communication problems that were turned up that were terrible. There's a great deal of improvement to be had there. What I want to know, though, is in view of the fact that there were worldwide ground stops, because there was no place for planes to come in with LAX closed. This is a time for you to take very serious consideration and accomplishment to get Ontario up and running as another airport in this area. And I hope you are both going to be committed to that.
Absolutely. Planes were diverted to Ontario and actually landed there. We also had international flights that continued to come in the entire way, and they were parked way out towards the ocean because those ones that were already underway what happened immediately is we cut off those shorter ones. We told anybody from Oakland, from San Francisco, from Albuquerque, from Phoenix, just don't even send the planes. And those that were in the air, we had to land, and we continue to do that. Absolutely. And I've talked with my colleagues. One of the first things I did is I want to be a better mayor for the region. And so I reached out for the first time in our city's, county's, region's history and invited the 87 other mayors that are part of LA County to meet with me at the mayor's residence here at Getty House. We had 65 of them RSVP, and we had 66 mayors. El Segundo was there, Santa Monica was there, Culver City was there, and we began to talk about things that we have in common. You know, traffic doesn't care where city border begins and ends. Crime doesn't care. You know, pollution certainly doesn't care. So what can we do so that I can stick up for San Gabriel so that they can get a gold line out in Claremont, so that I know that when we're going to them about LAX, they're going to be fighting for it for us too. And with Ontario, I'll just say this. My friends in Ontario, I said that I would turn a new page. I'm open to any discussions of how we can make that work better. We are being sued right now, and until that lawsuit is dropped, I can't negotiate with a gun to my head. So please drop that, and I'll say it again, and we can sit down and talk.
I'll just add a little bit to that. As the mayor said, there is a lawsuit, and the lawsuit has many parties to it, and hopefully those lawsuits will get settled or go away. I think doing so, there's a small potential of doing so in a way that benefits this community and deals with the question of regionalization. It may be like trying to do a 7-sided Rubik's Cube, but I certainly think that it's worth trying. The other thing I gotta say, there probably is, on the natural, no greater advocate for regional aviation in the city of Los Angeles government than me, or perhaps the mayor. You know, I want desperately to see us have a sensible aviation system, which means more than one major airport. Ontario is the natural place for that. I will say publicly, because maybe they'll hear it, because I've said it to them privately, boy, it would be so much better for a negotiating tactic, for progress to be made, if Ontario didn't go to, you know, sort of the rhetorical extremes of people like in Washington, D.C. I mean, they're really making it very hard to get to a place that we need to get to, and nobody wants them to get there more than I, but guys, in Ontario, chill out.
Let's go back over here.
Hi, Susie Shannon from Los Angeles. Each one of you in your jobs is in some way impacted by homelessness in the city, and we still remain the homeless capital of the United States. And the city was dubbed the meanest city for the homeless in the entire country. So if it costs less to provide permanent supportive housing for someone rather than have them out there homeless and living on the streets, from a humanitarian perspective and economic perspective, it doesn't make any sense. So why are we still the homeless capital of the United States, and what are you in each of your jobs doing to address this issue?
Maybe, yeah, Ron, why don't you guys go ahead? Ron, we haven't heard from you for a while. Go ahead.
That's really such an important question. For quite a while, actually, and before I became controller, I was serving on Home for Good, which is a task force that was put together by United Way and by the LA Chamber of Commerce to specifically look at issues of homelessness. And one of the first things that we did was begin to catalog all of the monies that are being spent on all sorts of different projects having to do with homelessness, be it temporary housing, be it issues that have to do with feeding programs. It can have to do with law enforcement costs. You begin to add all this up, and you realize that the problem is not so much about how much money we're spending, but about how it is that we're spending it. Now, there's no question that permanent supportive housing is very expensive. But when you look at what the bottom line costs are for law enforcement and for what it does to property values, what it does to so many other things, even if you could care less about homeless people, from a financial point of view, it makes sense to do exactly what it is that you're saying, which is to invest in permanent supportive housing for the people who so desperately need it. And by the way, it is the humanitarian thing to do. It is the decent thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. And I'm going to do everything in my power in looking at, by the way, how the city spends its money, but also in coordinating with all of these other agencies to make sure that we put our money so that we get truly a good return on investment.
Mike Feuer, you want to try to chime in?
Sure. You know, when I used to run, as many of you know, a public interest law firm called Betzetic, that means House of Justice. And when I was at Bethsedic, I sent members of our team, staff and volunteers, to homeless shelters to provide direct services to people who had no other way to get their rights vindicated. And I brought us down to Skid Row to work in tandem with a group called the Intercity Law Center on housing issues on Skid Row. Now I find myself as the city attorney. I have many thoughts about this because I've been on numerous panels and commissions on this issue. You know, first of all, we need a homeless policy that doesn't use the term the homeless anymore, because that term suffers from two flaws. First of all, it dehumanizes people, and secondly, it fails to recognize that we have multiple populations within the homeless population. Single moms with kids who can't afford first and last month's rent plus a security deposit need one kind of housing. They need to have housing, they need to have a place for their kids to be safe during the day, they may need some job training. Those needs are rather different from the mentally disabled Vietnam vet, whose needs are themselves very different from someone who's addicted to drugs, who's in a different position than somebody who's an alcoholic. This is a homeless policy that I would envision for our city would recognize these differences and target services specifically to those who need those services. We also have a service-resistant population out there on the street. That's really difficult to grapple with. No one has easy answers there. But I think that in many ways the city hasn't, for years if ever, really devoted concerted citywide effort to grappling with this issue. Now, as city attorney, I'm contending at the moment with a consequence of the issue we're talking about, not the underlying issues, because I inherited litigation, which the city has lost in several different iterations now, regarding the goods of people who are homeless on the street, and what to do with goods that are not attended versus goods that are attended, and trying to figure out a way to cut through the blunt instrument that is litigation and find some solutions that can strike a balance on this point between the rights of people who are homeless and businesses and residents who are trying to grapple with the consequences of goods in the middle of where they're trying to get their work done. So I'm actually in the middle of a settlement negotiation on this issue right now, and I can't talk about the details, though we have a mediation coming up very soon on this. But I'm trying to find a way, and it may not be possible, but I'm certainly trying as hard as we can to find a way to cut through the paradigm that is us against them, that looks at this issue as a source of contentiousness, as opposed to a way to look beneath the arguments and try to, practically speaking, solve a problem. So I have a vision, to be sure, about the kinds of services that we need in the city. I'm no longer a policymaker in the purest sense. I have a role as a lawyer in the city to protect the citizens of the city in every way I can. I want to try to find a way to bring both aspects of my background to bear on an issue which I think all of us need to agree we've all been deficient in. I think the recognition of that is the beginning of a commitment to change that.
Very quickly, I'd like to ask one more question if I can. Is the city really in a position to adopt the kind of policy that I think everybody in the room would like to see, or is it the responsibility of the county, which has the Department of Public Health, it has Department of Mental Health, Department of Health Services, all of those are the departments, it seems to me, Mr. Mayor,
That fight was fought a long time ago, and the court said it's both your responsibility, and that's why LAHSA was born. LAHSA, which is Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, is half county, half city. The problem is we've treated it half city, half county, and I intend to make sure that my commissioners, which are half, plus at least one, if not two, of the supervisorial, if not all of them, if we convince, but at least one or two, we would run a majority there, bring in the right leadership there, bring in the right tactics, make sure that we stop investing in a shelter industrial complex, which does amazing work but keeps people alive and on the street instead of taking them off the street. And I've seen great victories of how we address homelessness. I've seen it both in some of those individual populations as well as in geographic areas. In Hollywood, we started something called Hollywood Forward that has so far a 95% success rate, which is almost unheard of, over almost 200 people now that we've taken off the street with county, with private, with nonprofit, with faith community, with city, with LAHSA money together, focusing, and we went out there and did a vulnerability index that got to know every single person on the street, interviewed them, and ranked them on who was closest to death. It was a really somber thing to do, but that was the first person who we saw, the most vulnerable, that we got off the street. And yes, there are very hard people to treat, but we started with the hardest, and we've been working backwards. I've seen it work in the veterans population, where we have reduced, with a national commitment that President Obama has made to eliminating veterans homelessness, we're down 30% in a couple years. We could eliminate that in 5 or 6 years. We should be looking at doing that in all populations, especially, I can't stop without saying with Booker Pearson in the room, focusing on our homeless youth and our foster youth as well. Because if you look at the spillover effect into the criminal justice system, every lost foster youth who's homeless, who then gets in the criminal justice system, who then commits crimes, we're talking about millions of dollars per person, per individual, that we will all pay for later.
Hey, Warren, can I just real quickly
Time for
chime in?
one more question.
Just in 5 seconds, I just want to say, you know, the mayor just said something that I think should be a watchword for all of us. On most of these issues, there is not a rigid delineation between city and county, you know, LA City and school district and so on. And I think that all of us on this team before you today recognize that we will not be able to solve problems by staying in a silo. We have to work across jurisdictional lines. This is one example, but you're going to see all of us, I think, striving on many issues to cross these lines in ways that haven't been done before. And we all have relationships with others in other levels of government. That kind of teamwork transcends the collaboration within the city. It has to go beyond it, and we're going to do it.
And it's important to note that it's not just city and county, it's also federal. You know, because of sequestration in Washington right now, Section 8 vouchers are frozen. That's the affordable housing voucher that takes that single mom with kids and helps them get into housing. And even when they're available, the feds have rules that if you have a criminal record, you can't get a Section 8 voucher. So if you've lived on the street for a while, you've probably got a citation for something. You can't get into housing. Usually, when asked about housing, I give basically the same answer Mr. Feuer did. Because it's a very nuanced and complex issue. One thing I will say, just to be very brief on it, is I want to spend more time building affordable and supportive housing in my district. And, thank you. But the amount of time that I have to spend, my staff has to spend, our lawyers have to spend, the community spends fighting over the right of people to sleep on the street is ridiculous and is totally distracting all of us from the fight over the right to sleep in a bed in a home.
Do we have time for one more question? Do we still have time, or we want to wrap it up? One more, okay, up here. Can't hold the mic.
Good evening. I'm with the West LA Democratic Club, a senior advocate and a former member of the California Arts Council. My question is about related to the arts and education, the arts and humanities put back into education. And our club had a forum on charter school versus public schools. And the question is, what about having public funds used for a private entity like charter schools and not having the funds put back into enhancing all the public schools, if possible, and education?
Who wants to take that one? John Galperin? Go ahead.
Interestingly enough, I'm glad that you brought that up because the Comptroller's Office is actually wrapping up now an audit of the 1% for art fee in the city of Los Angeles, where developers pay us roughly about 1%, and that is supposed to be used for the arts. And we've done an analysis of how the money is being spent, about money that is unspent because of a variety of different rules that were set up that make it very difficult to spend some of that money, and how we can actually maximize what it is that we've got. So again, at least I see my role of looking at the money that is available for the arts and making the most of it. And I think that there are a variety of different pots of money that we can do the same thing with. And your help in helping to identify that and in offering suggestions around that is going to be really crucial.
We are the city where creativity lives. Los Angeles is indisputably the most creative spot on the face of the earth. Fashion, music, Hollywood. Look at our scientists and the engineers that we produce. We put rovers on Mars. We tell the stories of the world. And then you go to a public school, like I did in Boyle Heights during the campaign. It was a mayor's partnership school, so I don't know what lands in your spectrum, but somewhere in between. Brand new, paid for with taxpayer money, a room full of musical instruments. And the two principals said, we had enough money to hire one more teacher this year, and we had to decide between math and music, and the students we were getting in this middle school were 3% proficient in math. So we had to hire a math teacher. So those instruments all brand new when unplayed the entire year. I said, what a metaphor for what's wrong. That we have reduced education to, drills and tests and only English and math, and when you fall behind in English, we get more upset with you about English and give you more English lessons, and you stop even liking words, so you don't get to the history and to the stories and to the things that make you excited about school. We have to prioritize in this city that attracts the most creative people around the world to come and live here. We have to create those people from here. When Jackson Pollock said that it was an art teacher at Manual Arts where my grandmother went that changed his life, and suddenly he went into painting and changed the face of painting. When we look at Charles Mingus, who was the first bassist to lead a jazz band raised in Watts and came up through a system where he could actually learn music in the schools, Los Angeles will continue to just be a place that imports artists instead of imports artists in, as opposed to a place that produces them. And our obligation will be, and I certainly will fight as mayor, to ensure that we bring partnerships in to make sure that those studios, those fashion houses, those musicians, when I told musicians this, they said, we would love to teach that classroom. Let us volunteer 2 or 3 days a week, but we need to fund public education properly.
Thank you all. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to our questioners. Thanks to you all in the audience. Wait, we're not done. What? I didn't know what that meant.
Thank you all. Thank you, boys.
As always.
So I want to say goodbye to my mom.
Excuse me just one second.